Hello.
Hello.
You, due to the culturally appropriate approach, this question is to Mr. Guyula, but I'm going to talk to him through you. Stan. Numo kuringunarao, Mario Garinyarao, Jayolil. Naltian limurto, Tarangan Yolŋu Jalkrikur, Marika court system yo, Rome do, Tarangan, ka Rambangira, Tukarna, Maram Kajama.
Elizabeth, thank you.
In English, it says, how can we recognize traditional law structures in judicial systems to reduce Indigenous incarceration?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yiŋiya, I think that was directed to you.
Thank you. I have been calling for peacekeepers. I have been calling for senior elders and leaders to work with policing, with Balanda law and order, and Yolŋu law and order working together, so that when Yolŋu peacekeepers break up a court system, not a court system, but not breaking it up, but working together, solving issues, we know how we can solve this. We can, instead of sending people into prison while they wait on remand for courts and stuff, we will take them onto country. The leaders will take them onto country, peace leaders. We have been doing that. Our people have done this for many, many thousands of years to keep peace and in order in the country. And talking about the seriousness of a crime that happened, our law has dealt with more serious crimes, including deaths and stuff, through justice through the Makarata system. And we have solved it. But now it's complicated when Balanda and Yolŋu law systems don't agree with one another or argue with one another. It gets complicated. And we have been being manipulated and overtaken by most of our offenders end up in prisons and in being incarcerated unless we work together. Peacekeepers, Yolŋu senior elders and leaders working closely with police, community policing with Aboriginal leaders, and peacekeepers working together.
Mayatili.
Firstly, thank you, question go. I completely agree with Marika here that diversionary programs that are culturally appropriate in, for example, the Yolŋu context is definitely something that is an important space to build on. But I think parallel to that, what we all need to recognise and understand that needs to be changed is the mandatory sentencing laws here in the Northern Territory. The reason why we have such a high recidivism rate here for our Yolŋu people and why our prisons are overflowing here in the Northern Territory with Yolŋu people is because of the mandatory sentencing laws. And that's what has to change in order for change to be made.
June, I want to come to you on this, and because the Social Justice Commissioner, and we can talk about incarceration rates and look at the Royal Commission into black deaths in custody, but can I just get a response to you, Jacinta, just to what Mayatili said about mandatory sentencing in the Northern Territory?
Well, I think we've also got to, I know for my mob, Warbury mob, I want my mob to reassess how we do things. I don't think we should apply payback anymore, which involves violence, because that certainly exacerbates things. That lends itself to further incarceration. The number one reason why we are incarcerated at such high rates is because of interpersonal violence. And that if we can reduce violence, we can reduce rates of incarceration. For me, that is a huge priority. It speaks to the issue of family violence. It speaks to the issues of our children growing up in those environments. It speaks to us making decisions also in terms of the way we do things in traditional terms that might lend itself to exacerbating the problem as well.
Is there a role for traditional law in alternatives to sentencing that can still deal with the issues that you've identified, violence and breakdown in community, that can still deal with those issues but provide alternatives to incarceration?
I guess if it's done properly, because you don't want to provide the opportunity for that to be a way to escape responsibility either. But I mean, look, it's difficult. It's a difficult path to follow, because there are people living their traditional culture. There are very heavy cultural responsibilities on individuals, and it is that balance of understanding, well, where does it step over the line and actually become a human rights issue within our own culture, that we might be denying human rights as well to our own people?
June, we know something sadly is not working when you have 3% of the population that are more than a third of the prison population. And in the Northern Territory, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the juvenile detention is almost 100%. It's you look at those sort of frightful numbers. We had a Royal Commission. There were recommendations. We've seen increases. So where is the breakdown? And to go to the point that's of the question, what role does customary law, if any, have in being able to deal with that and provide alternatives?
Thank you. And it's a very important question, because this issue impacts many of our families right across the country. This has triggered a number of things for me in what Nampijinpa and other speakers have mentioned, but to try and sew it all together, yes, we do have our customary law frameworks that really outlines in our culture, in our places right across this country, what our roles and responsibilities are to nurture and grow children safely. And there are many communities that are still observing our customary law, our cultural ways of creating these positive pathways for our children. And when I think about customary law and that framework, I don't just think about the punitive side that Nampijinpa mentioned around the spearing. We know there's that side to it. But we're talking about alternative pathways to caring and protecting children. And I know, as well as Yolŋu from this northeastern Arnhem Land, that our frameworks are there, that they are nurturing, that they are protective. But this other system that has come over and on top of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people does not recognise that we have those frameworks in place, that we are capable of nurturing and protecting our children, that we can offer these alternative pathways. They've been called alternative pathways. These pathways have been there from the beginning of time for us. But it is because we are now living in this reality where through colonisation we have had the imposition of somebody else's law and through their institutions that says this is how we must deal with these people, and that's including our children. Now that whole experience has been traumatic for everyone, all Indigenous peoples across the country that have had to deal with the impact of colonisation. And so
we are dealing with generations and generations of issues of trauma, inherited trauma, and to arrive at this point where we are seeing the high incarceration rates of our children, children who have been exposed to trauma in communities. And, you know, I'm not shying away from the fact that there are things that are happening in our communities that shouldn't be happening by our own people. Now, we have to find the ways, the best ways we can respond to that, where we create a space where Western processes can respect our processes, that can respond in that holistic way, in a more genuine way, in a respectful way. But at the moment, Indigenous ways of responding or preventing issues is not acknowledged and seriously included in all these institutions and systems in our country. And that is what this voice and our voice around the ways in which we can do better is about.